Thank you for joining us for the first episode of Chapter 23, The Age of Progressivism. And really this age or era of progressivism grew out of the industrialization that had taken place in the United States in the late 1800s and early 1900s. People were kind of starting to try to improve the conditions of life which was created during this time. And this era kind of helped foster belief that government could and should intervene in people's lives as people looked to the state and local governments for more assistance. But we'll also take a look in future episodes of how the presidents like Teddy Roosevelt, William Howard Taft, and Woodrow Wilson all dealt with this era of progressivism as well. The spirit of progressivism kind of began in the cities to try to tackle the problems dealing with industrialization. But then it kind of spread throughout the nation and kind of really appealed to all, cutting across political ideologies. It wasn't just a Democratic movement or a Republican movement or a movement for like just one issue. There was a multitude of issues, and people looked to tackle all sorts of different problems that had been created during this era. So it really wasn't a coherent movement, but kind of more of almost a national event, as there was this feeling of optimism and progress as people looked to try to solve society's problems with government's help. It was kind of going back to that old Protestant duty, working hard, doing what's right, trying to help other people as well as yourself. And some of that kind of grows out of the rise of the middle class. For as we saw in other chapters, during this industrial age, the middle class had kind of continued to grow. And we see that trend continue with the rise of professions. Things like law, medicine, teaching, business, and even social work, all kind of requiring people to become more well-trained, further their schooling to become better at what they're doing. And the middle class kind of supported this progressive era for obvious reasons. One, it was a growing class. They enjoyed more luxuries and more leisure time. And with that, they kind of became aware of the poor working and living conditions of the lower class. And sometimes they're exposed to these things through the muckraking journalists that they would have read during this time. And then also you have the wealthier people in America that kind of looked at these issues, and they kind of thought that if we maybe clean up society and provide for the downtrodden a little bit more, that they'd be less likely to kind of turn to radical measures or riot or demand anything too drastic to be done. And so really this kind of spirit of progressivism took hold throughout the nation. And therefore, in kind of a move away from the old social Darwinist way of thinking, where you had those people that succeeded in life and others that were stuck in kind of a perpetual state of poverty, which was tough to get out of. We see kind of a transformation to this idea of what's known as the social justice movement, where people thought they should try to give more aid to the urban poor. And with the rise of social workers kind of seen as a profession, people who would be experts in these areas to try to improve other people's lives, we looked for those social cures. And other reforms to try and improve America's poor and working classes. And one example is the Purity Crusades, which kind of worked specifically against like prostitution and drunkenness. And we have the Women's Christian Temperance Union, which kind of attacked this, old alcohol problem that we've looked at before. In fact, by 1916, 19 states already had laws against the consumption of alcohol. And eventually, the 18th Amendment, or the Volstead Act, is ratified and takes effect in 1920. And it's partially because of this new crusade against alcohol that we eventually passed this prohibition. But also it gained support during World War I when people were trying to conserve grains and other ingredients that would be used in alcohol and try to save that for the soldiers fighting the war. But nonetheless, the 18th Amendment is ratified. And another movement that kind of gained steam during this time and comes to fruition is women's suffrage. In 1890, the National American Women's Suffrage Association was led by Carrie Chapman Catt and had over 2 million members. And where this group was kind of more peaceful and demonstrated, in kind of non-aggressive manners, as opposed to others who maybe broke up meetings and picketed the White House. They kind of draw attention to their cause. And as you can see, those Western states already had women's suffrage. But through the efforts of the women during this era and others who actually kind of started looking towards women to try to purify and cleanse society and to kind of give them the support to keep working for those efforts, men started to believe that women should have the right to vote as well. And eventually we then see the passage of the 19th Amendment, nicknamed the Anthony Amendment, after the long women's rights suffragette Susan B. Anthony. And that amendment will take effect as well in 1920. So as you can imagine, women were quite active in this era in a multitude of ways as we continue to look for social cures for different problems, maybe looking towards for government agencies and different levels of government to help out rather than individual charity. And one of the ways that one of the things that women kind of fought for ended up being child labor. And eventually Congress passes the Keating-Owen Act, which does in fact limit child labor. But that is eventually overturned 2 years later by Hammer versus Dagenhart, a Supreme Court decision, because it kind of said it should be that child labor should be kind of left up to the states, and that the federal government shouldn't really get involved. But with all these efforts, whether it be child labor, lowering the hours people had to work, increasing wages, or trying to improve working conditions, many different issues were trying to be tackled during this time. Some were just more successful than others. And in one of the areas where past practice was kind of being challenged was in education. And that movement was kind of led by John Dewey. Now, Dewey kind of believed that really the environment could shape the individuals, but that the individuals could also shape the environment. Now, when it came to education, he kind of wanted to move away from the authoritarian, teacher-led classroom and move away from kind of rote memorization, and kind of move things to more of kind of inquiry and creativity, and stressing kind of the special skills of each student to try to help them foster their abilities even further. So kind of a change in paradigm shift in the way that education was being looked at, something that obviously still continues today in our own time. And another movement that gains a little strength, especially before World War I, was socialism. In fact, several mayors were elected on the Socialist Party throughout the United States, and Eugene Debs, the old labor leader, had actually ran for president on the socialist ticket in 1900, 1904, and again in 1908. But this movement never really kind of gains too much momentum because of some of its radical beliefs, like overthrowing the capitalistic system. And after World War I, as we kind of look to kind of return to quieter ways and safer ways, and we try to move away from some of the more radical ideology of socialism and communism. And so this movement never really gains as much strength. However, there are some reforms that are made in government. For example, the 17th Amendment is ratified, which provides for direct election of senators. We also see direct primaries being instituted. So we kind of continue our look towards government and ways to try to make our office holders more accountable and responsible to the public will. And therefore we passed things like the initiative, referendum, and recall, all which kind of gives a little bit more power to the average citizen. But at the same time, we also see a growth in state regulatory commissions and agencies as people look to kind of experts to solve problems of society. And therefore, we have like regulatory boards being established, factory inspection laws, and even some worker compensation laws eventually being passed. But with that said, we do kind of see a decline in popular politics as the number of people going to the polls to vote kind of continued to go down during this era. But we do see an increase in lobbies and the pressure that they put on government for special interest. So there is kind of a little give and take here, when it comes to political reform and how things are done. Some things we may like, and then some things that maybe people are a little upset about, especially the way we kind of do business today. And yet, as people look to the state and local governments to solve those issues of the, kind of the industrial age, this progressive era, probably the most prominent governor to kind of, tackle things was Robert La Follette from Wisconsin. And he had what was known as the Wisconsin Idea. And this was kind of what we see is, Wisconsin becomes the first state to pass an income tax. And they also had direct primaries within their state. La Follette attacks railroad rates, provides for an industrial commission, and looks to kind of improve life for the people of Wisconsin through kind of further work with education, public utilities, and even workers' compensation. And so as governor of Wisconsin, La Follette really kind of leads a charge and really creates a model that other states will kind of try to emulate. But we'll take a closer look at what some of our presidents do during the Progressive Era. People like Teddy Roosevelt, Taft, and Wilson.